called in accordance with Standing Order 1064. The committee will consider the request from 4 members proposing the undertaking of a study of the safety and security of passengers required to stay in federally mandated quarantine facilities and home under federal quarantine orders. This print is getting very small. So with that, the motion has been introduced and is properly before the committee. I'm assuming someone will wish to speak to it, and the first hand up I see is Ms. Stubbs.
Well, thank you, Chair. Thanks for very efficiently organizing this meeting for our committee to discuss this this really urgent issue. It is a terrible circumstance that has brought us all together today, but I think certainly one that requires the urgent and comprehensive attention of the members of this Public Safety Committee. So we will all be aware, of course, last week there were initial reports about charges being laid for 2 separate sexual assaults, one in a quarantine facility in Montreal and one at a home of a woman adhering to federal quarantine mandate requirements, where charges have been laid by the Halton Peel Regional Police. In the first case of the alleged sexual assault in Montreal, the accused is also charged with break and enter and harassment. And in the case of the second alleged sexual assault, where the charges from the Halton Regional Police have been laid, the individual has also been charged with extortion. So I am sure that all members of this committee share in our concern about these incidences and share in the necessity for we as members of this committee to examine overall the risks to public security and to personal security and safety of Canadians and travelers who are in federally run quarantine facilities by federal mandate under federal orders, and the security of Canadians who are trying to comply to federal orders at home to quarantine. There is our obligation, I believe, here is not to examine the specific charges or the specific cases, because law enforcement has clearly already indicated they have sufficient evidence to place such charges, and that will proceed. But I think it is clearly our fundamental obligation to examine the clear risks to safety and security, to seek information and accountability on what are now these obvious concerns relating to the protection and safety and security systems within federal facilities, and the training, the vetting, and the oversight of those employed to carry out those federal travel orders in those facilities and at home. Because importantly, this mandate, this committee's mandate is to include the oversight and review of actions by the CBSA, by the RCMP, by police, and for public safety. And so in a variety of different ways, each of these bodies are directly involved in both the Federal Quarantine Act and obviously ought to be involved in what now is clearly, we know of, alleged assaults, sexual assaults against individuals under their care, against women under their care. The argument as to why it is clearly our responsibility as members of this committee is, of course, because these rules are being imposed by the federal government. They are related to restrictions to border and to the borders and to travel, which is clearly under the purview of public safety. And And so it is our obligation, I think, as federal members of parliament, particularly on this committee, to get answers from first officials. And colleagues, you'll notice in the motion, the majority of the officials that we have requested appear before this committee are in agencies under the purview of public safety. There are some officials that would come from the Public Health Agency of Canada because of their particular involvement in the execution of these orders, but the majority of witnesses that we've called for are clearly under the purview of public safety. And so it is, I think, urgent since there has been no suspension of the program, and to date, no comprehensive or substantive answers about what review is happening right now, about how many others may be at risk, about what gaps there are, and certainly about, there have been no answers so far about what concrete measures will be put in place to prevent this from happening, to prevent these kinds of instances from happening again, which is obviously a critical concern to every single one of us. So I think it goes without saying that the very least that Canadians can expect is to be safe, particularly in the presence of federal representatives and while in federal facilities. And I'm confident that every single member here shares the belief that these instances are unconscionable and require urgent attention, oversight, and examination of what has happened and what actions must be taken to prevent it in future. So I guess those are the reasons that I do anticipate support from this committee to proceed with, in the first place, calling the relevant officials to examine all of these issues comprehensively, and then in the second place, to call the relevant ministers in order to also answer these crucial questions for Canadians. And so that is why we are moving that pursuant to standing order, pursuant to the standing order, the Standing Committee on Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness begin this study into the safety and security of passengers required to stay in federally mandated quarantine facilities and at home under federal quarantine orders, and the failure of the federal government to prevent sexual assaults and other crimes against travelers under these federal orders. And that is why we're asking for 2 meetings to be scheduled within 2 weeks. And I think that's a reasonable amount of time to request officials and ministers to come here with concrete answers, while people currently are clearly at risk. And we actually have no idea how many other people have been at risk or violated at this moment. And so, of course, that within those 2 meetings would be scheduled within 2 weeks of the passage of this motion, each of those meetings not being for less than 3 hours, that they be televised, and that for the first meeting, 3 of the outlined witnesses from the Public Health Agency of Canada, 3 of the witnesses we've indicated from the RCMP, and 2 of the witnesses we've indicated from the CBSA attend, and that, of course, for the second meeting, but that both the Minister of Public Safety and the Minister of Health appear at the same time for no less than 3 hours, and that if ministers do not agree within 1 week of the adoption of this motion, within that length of time prescribed, that the chair should be instructed to report to the House forthwith the recommendation that this committee be empowered to order his or her appearance from time to time. So thanks again, Chair, for scheduling this urgent meeting. Look forward to the consideration of our motion, anticipate that we all take our moral and our powerful responsibility to protect vulnerable people and protect the safety and security of all Canadians, especially when we have reports that has been violated in a federal facility under federal orders with federally mandated individuals, and also in the sanctity of a woman's own home, by a federally mandated screening officer there to carry out compliance and enforcement of federal rules. So thanks, colleagues, for your consideration, and I look forward to the future work we're going to do on this really critical and urgent issue.
I see 5 hands. Mr. Couric was up first, then he took his hand down, and then he put it back up. I'm assuming you're still interested in speaking?
I'll cede my position in line for the moment. Thanks.
Okay, then Ms. Damoff is next.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for arranging for this meeting on such short notice, Chair, and to the clerk and staff as well. You know, there's a few things that Ms. Stubbs said that we absolutely agree with. And certainly, you know, all women deserve to be free, live free from sexual violence. And there's absolutely no doubt that everyone on this committee agrees with that. No one deserves to be subjected to a sexual assault. The one that occurred in the home was in my community of Oakville, and it is currently under investigation by the Halton Regional Police Service. They did arrest and charge a security guard on February the 23rd. So I do find it interesting that just last week, Ms. Stubbs informed the Public Safety Committee that the committee should not act when there is an ongoing investigation, and had tried to dissuade us from doing anything until the investigation was completed. But now she's changed her mind. But whatever, that's fine. One thing I would like to correct, though, is that the RCMP and CBSA do not have any involvement with this. The incident in Oakville is being investigated by the Halton Regional Police Service. The RCMP is not involved. In fact, when I read the Halton Police's press release, it's quite clear that they were hired and trained by the Public Health Agency of Canada. Having said that, it doesn't really matter who is responsible, because the incidents happened. And but I just want the record to show the RCMP and CBSA are not involved. I note as well the Conservatives have brought the exact same motion to the Status of Women Committee. So I'm not sure if they're trying to tie up government time on multiple committees on this, or whether they'll withdraw that motion if public safety chooses to go ahead. But Chair, I would like to propose an amendment to the Conservatives' motion that the meeting be 2 hours long, that the Minister of Public Safety and the Minister of Health appear first. I think that, you know, we need to hear from them. And I would also like to propose that we add as a witness Dr. Isaac Bogosh to provide an independent assessment of vaccines and quarantines and all of that. So I'll leave it there, Chair, but I would propose those 3 amendments to the motion that the Conservatives have brought forward.
Thank you. So we would debate the amendment first. I'm working on the assumption that that's not considered to be a friendly amendment by the mover. So that would be the focus of the initial debate and vote. But since the substance of the matter is inextricable, I'm going to treat this as one debate for both the amendment and the motion itself, unless there is wild and violent objection. Seeing no wild or violence, Mr. Motz.
Thank you, Chair. I will not speak to the proposed amendments to the motion. I will speak to the comments made by Ms. Damoff, and in support of the, also then in support of the motion. Ms. Damoff suggested that there was an about face from committee meeting last week on the investigation being held by this committee into a matter that she brought forward to the committee. I think that particular incident, you're comparing apples to oranges. This motion does nothing to investigate the incident of the Halton Regional Police are investigating. Zero. It has to do with the policy. It has to do with the manner in which training may be conducted, the manner in which background and vetting occurred. How are these organizations selected? You know, who's responsible to be accountable for them? there's a lot of questions Canadians have, and it is not a rejigging or a re-examination of an already involved police investigation. It's got zero to do with that. So we want to be very, very, very clear on that matter. And it's not the same as what was talked about last week. Also, I think it's important to realize that, and Ms. Stubbs mentioned it just briefly, experts across our country, women's advocacy groups have said that, for every sexual assault that is reported, there are many, many more that go unreported. And if we're to take that as what is the potential here, we have no idea the impact that what was apparently an incoherent process to identify quarantine sites, to then manage them, have people provide security for them. We have no idea how many other people may have been victims at this stage. Plus, we have no idea how many people in their own home are subject to not only past occurrences, but who might be at risk for future occurrences should there not be some corrective measures taken as we speak to have this looked at to say, where's the gaps that exist now in the identifying and vetting of these individuals who are quarantine officers to go and check on compliance, as well as the facilities and the whole logistics around the facilities involving individuals who are there to provide security, the reports of whether locks are actually removed from doors to keep people either in or out, and then the risk that poses. Like, there's a lot that we need to look at here. And the fact that the government apparently is unwilling to have a suspension of this particular policy until this can be identified certainly creates an urgency for this committee to get involved. And this is a public safety issue. It is definitely a public safety issue. If this is not public safety, then I don't know where the definition of public safety would fall. So that'll be my comments for now, Chair, and I would reserve to follow that up later in this debate.
Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to first of all say, of course, we're all very concerned about what the two incidents that have been reported. One which is committed by a fellow traveler who was in a quarantine hotel. The other by a quarantine or screening officer. But I had a look at the Quarantine Act, because all of this is under the Quarantine Act before this meeting. And it seems that all of the powers under the Quarantine Act, and it defines minister as the Minister of Public Health, all of the powers are given to the Minister of Public Health to appoint quarantine officers, to establish quarantine locations, and to put rules in place and be in charge of the whole system. So it seems to me that in the first instance, the whole quarantine policy, and we're being asked by this motion to recommend the suspension of the quarantine measures that have been put in place for public health reasons as a result of two incidents, one apparently under, at least alleged by a quarantine officer, another by a citizen in a hotel. And I'm just wondering how far this committee does have jurisdiction to look into it. Is it something that the Department of the Minister of Health and the Health Committee should be examining if that was their desire? And I don't know whether this committee should be making recommendations as they're being suggested here about public health matters to suspend a quarantine, I presume because of the lack of safety. But I know I don't want to make little by any means of the assaults that have taken place in the circumstances. But we have various public bodies that are enforcing the law. We don't, police officers have been charged with assault and worse. We don't suspend the operation of the police force. So I'm not that's a full analogy in this particular circumstances. I know this is a new program, and there's probably a requirement to have a look at the measures that have been taken to ensure that the people who are given authority under this act, under this Quarantine Act, are properly trained and that they've done due diligence in carrying that out. I'm just wondering whether this committee is in a position to do that, given that it's the Ministry of Public Health that's responsible. So I just raise that by way of trying to put some sort of a box around what it is we're being asked to do. Does the Minister of Public Safety, who's Minister Blair, does he have any responsibility in these circumstances when the activity is undertaken under the Public Health Act by people appointed by the Minister of Public Health? And so the question really is, how far can we go under our jurisdiction? And to say that a matter is one of just public safety generally doesn't mean that the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness has a role. So I think if we're going to do anything here, we ought to try to narrow the scope of what we're trying to do, because we can't, we don't shut down the prisons because there's an assault occurring within the prison. We don't shut down a program for public health because something needs to be fixed in the way it's operating. So I just want to say that by way of opening remarks. I'm prepared to consider what we can do as a committee and what we ought to do as a committee. But I think the idea of the full scale that's been proposed by Ms. Stubbs seems to be a bit of a reach on behalf of this committee under this subject.
Thank you. Mr. Van Popta.
Good, thank you, Mr. Chair. Canadians are very concerned about this. I've heard a lot from people calling into my constituency office and just people that I know in the community who are very disturbed about the poor rollout of this program, which I think could be good. Conservatives have said all along since the very beginning of the pandemic that we need to look at our borders to make sure that travelers coming into Canada are not bringing this 19 virus in with them. I just want to relate a story in my writing. So my first exposure to we weren't even calling it COVID-19 at the time. It was in January of 2020. So 6 weeks before the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 to be a pandemic. There was a scheduled Chinese New Year here in my riding that I was going to attend. It was canceled because people from the Chinese community here in my riding of Langley-Aldergrove, which is quite a significant community, said there's something going on in China. We want to stop that. So we're going to cancel this meeting because we're just not quite sure what that is. So this has been with us for 13 months, and the Liberal government has been very, very slow in securing our borders. Canadians want to know that the government is doing whatever it needs to keep them safe, to keep them healthy. And so whereas this program of the hotel quarantines would generally have our support, it's got to be done properly. And it's clear, it's becoming more and more abundantly clear that developing the program and rolling it out has been very poor and very inadequate. Is it a matter of public safety? Well, it's a matter of public safety and health, of course. But we're talking about now, and what this motion is about, is responding to 2 cases of incidences of sexual assault. That needs to be looked at. That is the role of this committee. So I fully support this committee looking into these incidences, not to look at them specifically, as was suggested by one of the earlier speakers. We're not going to be investigating cases of sexual assault specifically, but about the establishment of the program. Were officers properly trained? Were they vetted? What's it going to look like going forward? Can the program be fixed in short order, or does it have to be dismantled and rebuilt? These are the things that we're going to be looking at in accordance with the motion. I think the motion is definitely in order, and it is certainly for this committee to investigate. Thank you.
Mr. Couric, this is the point where you deferred. Are you still wishing to defer, or do you wish to speak?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would just make a couple of quick comments. And my colleague Mr. Harris had mentioned about the motion including mention of a suspension of the program, and the motion does not suggest that. Now there have been aspects of debate where Conservatives have taken that position, but truly the reason for this motion is, as Ms. Stubbs outlined, is to get some answers for the very serious questions that Canadians have regarding this very serious issue and continuing revelations that keep coming forward. And I would just note, it seems interesting that the government, that members from the governing party would suggest that this is somehow wasting government's time. With all due respect, I think that this is Parliament. Parliament is made up of members of Parliament from across our country representing various parties, and it is incumbent upon all members of Parliament to ensure that Canadians get the answers that they deserve, whether it's in regards to some of the very serious allegations that have been brought forward. Further, there's a number of other questions outlined in this motion that certainly I would hope that there is universal support that Canadians do in fact get these answers. So with that, I think that this is the job of parliamentarians is to get answers on serious questions like this, and certainly I look forward to being able to support Ms. Stubbs' motion in this regard. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I
Yes.
just want to be clear. I'm the only person from the government who has spoken thus far, and I never said that this was a waste of time.
Okay. Point of clarification, not a point of order, but thank you. I'm going to go to standing members, or members of the standing committee first, and then I see Ms. Rempel Garner wishes to speak, and so I'll go to her. So the first person up is Madame Cara, then Madame Michaud, and then Mr. Motz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for bringing this meeting so urgently. First, let me just say, we all strongly condemn the incidents that have been raised, but as pointed out by my colleague, Ms. Damoff, the incidents that have been mentioned are currently under a criminal investigation. But I also agree with the urgency of this, and I think it's important to hear directly from the minister and of course about the quarantine measures and the issues that have been raised. So I think we can all come to some common ground here with the amendment that has been proposed by my colleague to have perhaps one meeting with Minister Blair and Haidu for the first hours and have officials in the second to get some of the answers as Mr. Carrick has suggested. In light of the fact that our committee, Mr. Chair, is already very, very behind on some of the very important work that we set out to do, including finishing up the systemic racism study, which we started back in the summer of last year. And there's some very important recommendations in that. I think that we need to, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to have that study completed, presented to the House so we can start on some of the tangible actions to address those issues. So I think we can, with the amendment, we can actually do both things at the same time, address some of the issues that have been raised, which I think are important, but also then move forward with the work that this committee has set out to do. So I agree with the amendment by my colleague.
Thank you. Mr. Corrick, you still have your hand up. Is that okay? Madame Michaud.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. I am for this motion tabled by the Conservatives because there are a number of questions that have been asked since the beginning and the implementation of this mandatory hotel stay. There are many issues, certain failures that have led to issues, public security and safety issues. So I think that we should study it at our standing committee. It also has to do with healthcare, of course, because it has to do with the pandemic. But the simple fact that CBSA agents and officers have a significant role to play in the implementation of this quarantine, which is under the auspices of the federal government. All of this means that we should be seized with the matter at this committee and today when we have questions for Health Canada with regards to people abroad who want to come back and who would like to know more about quarantine exemptions. Often we're sent to CBSA for answers. We're told these are CBSA decisions that will be made arbitrarily or on a case-by-case basis, and so it is up to our committee, in my opinion, to ask questions to officials, and we should ask questions about these alleged assaults. I think that we have answers to receive to many questions that have not been answered for a long time. A motion was tabled to study border measures and border management since the beginning of the pandemic. This is all interlinked. So I am for this motion.
Mr. Motz?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ensure, and I don't know your procedure, but I wanted to ensure that Ms. Rempel-Garner had an opportunity to speak, and I was going to defer my time to her.
I'd already said she was going to speak. She has a right to participate.
Thank you very much.
Not vote, but she does have a right to participate. But I was going to defer to the members of the standing committee first before I spoke before Ms. Gardner. But Mr. Harris just put his hand up, but I was anticipating going to Ms. Rempel-Gardner. So Ms. Rempel-Gardner.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for having me at your meeting today to discuss an important issue. I wanted to potentially address some of Mr. Harris's concerns that he raised with regard to scope, because I also have been following this motion as a member of the Standing Committee on Health, and I think I might be able to address some of his concerns and perhaps some of the thoughts of my colleagues on why this best belong here. So first of all, just to clarify his concern on scope, I read through the motion again, and it doesn't say anything about, making a recommendation to the House that echoes the calls of the Conservatives to temporarily suspend the program. This is just looking at process and procedure to understand where the failings occurred and how they can be rectified quickly so that people, and especially Canadian citizens that are in this situation right now, don't continue to be subjected to the chaos and the unsafe conditions that are currently being reported on in the media. With regard to the appropriateness of public safety, I note that the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security has a mandate to review the legislation, policies, programs, and expedite plans of government department and agencies responsible for the public safety and national security, policing and law enforcement, corrections and correctional release of federal offenders, emergency management, and crime prevention and the protection of Canadian borders. So as it relates to COVID-19, on the CBSA's own website, they have, and I can send the link around if need be, they have a chart that shows all the responsibilities of enforcement of health measures. So certainly PHAC does have a large role of that, but as it relates to the safety and security measures, it's very clear by that own chart that both the CBSA and the RCMP have, in their own regard, taken and noted responsibility for measures such as enforce when needed travelers that do not comply with orders, for example, during visits or compliance, that's stated as an RCMP measure, undertake enforcement actions as necessary, the RCMP, CBSA, support law enforcement agencies by providing entry information. So I did review this as the Conservative Shadow Minister for Health, and there's a lot of stuff. I think an argument could have been made at Health Committee to have it go to SECU. So I think that's why it's here, is because if we're looking at the process to keep people safe, the law enforcement agencies would traditionally be reporting into this committee. That said, COVID means that there's a lot of overlap, but I think that when we're looking at process, that's probably why it's before this committee today. The second thing is, I noted my colleague, Ms. Damoff, talked about the fact that I wasn't aware of that, but there was potentially a motion in front of the Status of Women Committee. I think it's really important that when we are looking at public safety concerns, that we are taking a gender lens or a gender analysis of that situation. I think that women, I mean, I'm sure all the women on this committee have traveled alone by themselves at some point in time before. And, you know, we might have a hotel routine that the guys on this committee wouldn't have, like closing the locks, the security locks, and ramming a chair against the door. And whereas I think the Status of Women Committee could have some scope on looking at the security impacts of quarantine measures on women, or, you know, that sort of stuff. I'm interested to know whether or not the CBSA and the RCMP, who do report into this committee, undertook that type of thinking when looking and designing measures at the quarantine hotel situation, and also for the situation that occurred in Ms. Damoff's riding. I think that that's something that squarely falls in the committee here. With regard to the amendment that's on the floor, there was a lot of thought given to the structure and order of the meetings. I think that it's really important to have, and it has been my experience with the Health Committee on other measures, to have officials within the department who are writing the policy give their thoughts prior to having the ministers come in and talk about the political decisions and the political implications. There is a difference between the officials, what information they provide to committee, as opposed to the ministers. The ministers would be there to talk about overall political direction and policy. Public officials would be there to be talking about technical information used to inform those decisions. And I know that my colleagues who are official members of this committee gave that thought and wanted to have the officials first, so that we would have the technical information to be able to brief and prepare other members of the committee prior to the ministers, right? So it's sort of like a thinking of, okay, well, what technical information and analysis was used or given to the government, and then trying to understand whether or not the government used that information and what would then be the outcome of better public policy. So in that regard, I don't think that the amendment, for colleagues on the call here or on the meeting that are voting, I would advise against voting against this amendment because I think that the order of the meeting as it stands right now will allow colleagues to better put forward recommendations and better question the ministers, frankly. In terms of time, I mean, this is a pretty serious issue. I think it's one that has to be addressed regularly, expeditiously. And, you know, I think that the amount of time that's put in there will allow colleagues of all political stripe, including the Bloc and the NDP, to have enough question rounds with the ministers and public officials to actually get that information out. I know that when ministers come here, members of the minority parties typically don't get as many opportunities for question rounds. And so I think by government members trying to reduce the amount of time that has been proposed in this meeting, I would hate to see those opportunities be lost. So with that, I think it's very clear that the scope does fall in here. I want to reassure my colleague, Mr. Harris, that the motion itself does not call for any action. It's a study of what's going on. And as a representative here from the Standing Committee on Health, I think it would fall squarely within this mandate. It could inform other studies at the Standing Committee on Health, certainly, but understanding the process by which our security agencies and law enforcement agencies that fall under the auspices of this committee, how they have made these decisions will help inform our committee's decision on whether or not to pursue that afterwards. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Harris?
Thank you, Chair. And I note Ms. Rempel pointed out that the request to suspend the quarantine was not contained in the motion, and she's quite correct. But it is, and why I mention it is because in the letter to the Chair that was written by the 4 members from the Conservative Party, the 4th paragraph says, given the failure to ensure that Canadians under federally mandated quarantines are protected, the Liberal government must put a pause on these new measures. And I took that to mean that the idea behind this was to suspend the quarantine measures, quarantine hotel measures. And so that's why I mentioned it. And I think, you know, it is an important measure. it does say while continuing with the pre-existing on-arrival testing and the 14-day at-home quarantine for all international travelers. So it's not to stop the 14-day quarantine, but to suspend the measures, I guess, meaning the measures for the hotel procedures. And and I don't want it to be understood that I mention these issues about the from the Quarantine Act to stop an investigation by this committee into any aspects of this. I was merely pointing out that the division of activity and responsibility is not to the public safety ministry per se, because the Canadian, the border services, they deal with what happens at the border. And I'm interested in knowing what the relationship is between the activity at the border and where Public Health Canada takes over. Is it simply a quarantine officers at the airport facilities, and do they take over there with the quarantine screening officers and who looks after transportation to the hotels, et cetera? So there are questions that do need to be asked, and certainly if we have people there before the committee from public health who are responsible for the establishment of the forces or the quarantine officers who are in charge, we would like to know what the training arrangements are and who's responsible for that. So there are questions that need to be asked and they need to be answered. And I think that that's something that I am prepared to see happen. So I wasn't speaking against this committee having any say in it at all. I'm sorry I didn't get to speak before Ms. Rempel-Garner, because that's what I wanted to point out before she even started. But I understand where she's coming from as far as the concerns that exist, and I think we all share them. That this has to be, public have to have some confidence that what's being done is being done properly. But I'm also aware that and I, by the way, if we do have only one meeting or whether it's one or two, I think the idea of hearing from the officials first is a good idea, because let's hear what the program is, and then let's hear what the ministers have to say about it, and any questions that they might have as to how the supervision is working and how the due diligence has been carried out in establishing the program. Because I think it is something that's been put together pretty quickly, even though the government had many months to decide whether to do this. But obviously with the new variants that have penetrated our country, and we here in Newfoundland and Labrador are very familiar with that with the new British variant, because we saw how quickly it traveled around my neck of the woods in my riding, hitting 22 high schools in a matter of 2 weeks with infections from with the British variant that is very contagious and very worrisome. So I think we're all aware as a public health measure how important this is, and I think Canadians support the notion of strict measures at the border. In fact, many of the Conservatives have been calling for them for many months, to have stronger measures at the border, and now we have them. They're certainly imperfect. There's no question about that, and we need to have a look at that. So I do support the idea of proceeding with an examination of that. I am also very mindful of this committee's other work, which I don't think we need to say more about, other than one of the studies is the study on racism in policing, which we are all familiar with how serious that matter is in terms of the public safety as well as the proper operation of our police forces. We've done a major study. We need to get a report done, and we can't postpone that. Now, I know we're talking about 2 meetings over 6 hours. I think perhaps we can do what needs to be done in a shorter period of time.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Before I call on Ms. Stubbs, the way I hear your argument is that you would flip the order of ministers and officials, from ministers first to officials second, and you would flip that from officials to ministers. Is that correct? Just I want to make sure I heard you correctly.
You're asking me, sir?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. I would have the I would have the officials first, so they hear the design of the program, what is it they're doing, and answer questions, and then the ministers can respond to any questions that the members have.
Okay, so that would require an amendment.
I can change my.
Okay, well, then I'll leave it to you to make this a friendly amendment as opposed to an unfriendly amendment. But I see Ms. Stubbs first, and then Ms. Demoff. You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. As much as some colleagues just must love me in that mode. thanks for letting me know.
Don't put it to a vote.
I do just want to reinforce that that's of course the order of the meeting request in the original motion, which was to have the officials first and then the ministers for exactly all the reasons outlined by our colleagues. And again, do just want to add to the comments that have been made by other colleagues about the relevance of public safety on this issue. And it is, of course, in part because it is a federal regulation that ensures that all air travelers now must present themselves to CBSA to validate their health conditions and their quarantine plans. And so unfortunately, whether they like it or not, the subsequent safety and security of Canadians and travelers will clearly be subject in part to the actions and decisions of CBSA officers when Canadians are sent to quarantine sites or mandated to quarantine and isolate at home. So that is yet another reason why this is in the right committee and under our purview to get answers and accountability for, because that Quarantine Act systematically and explicitly refers to the responsibilities and roles of CBSA agents. And these are border rules and decisions that have then resulted into where Canadians or travelers end up. And so I think I just really urge my colleagues to notwithstanding maybe our differing perspectives on what remedies or what action should be taken right now, we really ought to be debating this subject and the request of the motion, which as I did deliberately address in the beginning of my opening comments, doesn't actually examine individual cases. That's not what's being called for at all. And also within the motion itself doesn't also include, Jack's right, what are conservative proposals for putting a suspension right now until all of these issues can be ironed out, figured out, and the safety and security of all Canadians and all travelers can be assured. We should be making our decision, I think, based on the motion at hand. And so I just hope that those comments will actually, assure and reinforce to everybody here that this is the rightful place for us to be seeking answers and clarity on these issues that Canadians deserve, and really does have to do fundamentally with their security and their safety in the process of compliance with federal orders that are under the responsibility and the purview of CBSA and a variety of other agencies under public safety. Thanks, Chair.
Madame Damoff.
Thanks, Chair. As I indicated just before Ms. Stubbs spoke, I would be prepared to change my amendment that the officials come first and the ministers come in the second hour, but the rest would remain the same.
Thank you. Mr. Harris.
Yes, I just wanted to add that this is something that I think is brought on an urgent basis, and I agree with it being brought forward. I would just want to add that if, in the sense of urgency, I would be happy to find a time this week if the committee is available to have this meeting and we can get the officials' presence, that we should do it this week. If it is a matter of urgency and the concern is there, then I'm prepared to find the time if other members are available to do that, and we can get the officials and the ministers present.
Thank you. I don't see any, Jack, any delay. Take your raise hand function down. I don't, Mr. Kirk.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. would it be possible to either get text of the amendment or have the amendment because I
was going to have the clerk repeat it back to the committee so that everybody understands it, and we are all voting on the amendment as we now understand it. Mr. Clerk, can you do that for us? En anglais et en français, s'il vous plaît.
Shall I read the whole text of the motion or just where the changes are proposed?
We're dealing with the amendment first, and then the friendly amendment as proposed by Mr. Harris. So if you'd read it back to the committee on the basis of the amendment first, because that's will be the first vote, and then we'll go to the main motion, which I don't think needs to be read to the committee because everyone has a copy of it.
So in English, the motion reads with the proposals for amendment. So it says that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the Standing Committee on Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness immediately begin a study into the safety and security of passengers required to stay in federally mandated quarantine facilities and at home under federal quarantine orders, and the failure of the federal government to prevent sexual assaults and other crimes against travelers under these federal orders. That 2 meetings be scheduled within 2 weeks of the passage of this motion, and that each meeting being for not less than, and this is the first part of the amendment, 2 hours.
No, it's 1 meeting, clerk.
Sorry, one meeting.
1 meeting for 2 hours.
Okay. So that 1 meeting for 2 hours, and that this meeting be televised, and that for the meeting, the following witnesses be invited. From the Public Health Agency of Canada, Cindy Evans, Vice President, Emergency Management Branch, Karen Walton, Senior Director, Emergency Management Branch, and Sally Thornton, Vice President, Health Security Infrastructure Branch. From the RCMP, Michael Duhem, Deputy Commissioner for Federal Policing, Ken Hansen, Director of Federal Enforcement Branch, and Warren Coons, Director of Integrated Border Enforcement Team. From the CBSA, Paul McKinnon, Vice President, Intelligence and Enforcement, and Andrew LeFranc, Vice President, Director General for Enforcement and Intelligence. And the other addition was Dr. Isaac Bogosh, sorry. And that the Minister of Public Safety and the Minister of Health appear at the same meeting.
It would be, I think, for the second hour.
For the second hour. Okay.
That the Minister of Public Safety and Minister of Health appear.
For the second hour. And then if the ministers do not agree within 1 week of the adoption of this motion to accept this invitation for the length of time prescribed, the chair shall be instructed to report to the House forthwith a recommendation that this committee be empowered to order his or her appearance from time to time.
Okay, the discussion is on the motion as amended, or as proposed amended. I hope people understand the flipping that's going on here between ministers and officials. I see Mr. Motz. You have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to confirm this. Mr. Harris spoke to some an amendment that he was. Oh, I think we just. Oh, there he is. I thought we lost him off the connection. I just wanted to speak to the understanding that Mr. Harris had in agreement to this. First of all, it's brand news to me now that in reading this that we are proposing 1 2-hour meeting, when the initial motion was 2 3-hour meetings. I think we can speak to that, but is that the understanding you had, Mr. Harris, that it was going to be 1 2-hour meeting? Because that's not the understanding I had with the amendment that was read initially by Ms. Damoff.
Okay, that's a legitimate point of clarification. Maybe Mr. Harris and Ms. Damoff can speak to it.
I certainly heard the 2 hours, but with all the witnesses that we have, it may not be possible to do it in 2 hours. So, you know, if it has to go, if someone wants to amend that to 3 hours, we can have a 1 3-hour meeting. But what I'm interested in is doing this efficiently and soon, as opposed to having it go on for you know, into the next week and the next week. That this is something that is you know, current and it's concerning, and members of this committee are concerned about it, as we've just heard from everyone, and our visitor, Ms. Remco Gardner. So I think we should capture the moment and do it this week if we can find 2 hours or 3 hours. If someone wants, the amendment as it stands right now is for 2 hours, but if that's 3 hours, then I'd be satisfied with that too.
Chair, then in response to that, then Chair, I would suggest that if the mover of the amendment is amicable, that we have either 2 2-hour meetings or 1 4-hour meeting as an amendment to that, and we do it soon. Agreed. And we're certainly able to try and make that happen. And that's 1 4-hour meeting or 2 2-hour meetings as soon as it can be arranged.
Okay, we've amended, there's been one friendly amendment of Madame Damoff's initial amendment, which has been accepted and has been read into the record. If in fact we are going to change that, or if in fact Mr. Motz wishes to move an additional amendment, you're welcome to do so, unless Madame Damoff is prepared to see Mr. Mott's comments as friendly comments.
No, Chair, I'm not.
Then
Okay,
Chair,
so-
then Chair, I'm prepared to move that in light of the original motion and in light of the Ms. Damoff's amendment, that I would move that the amendment I would like to add is that, yes, we keep the public officials first for a 2-hour meeting and the ministers second for a 2-hour meeting. And whether it be 1 4-hour time slot or 2 individual meetings will be up to the committee. That would be the motion or the amendment I would move to this particular motion, please.
Okay, so that was the amendment to the amendment. I hope we're all keeping track here. I thought I saw Madame Michaud's hand up.
I was going to propose the same amendment that was just proposed by Mr. Motz. Maybe not for our meetings, but perhaps 2 meetings of 2 hours for Monday and next Thursday. And then we could go on with our study. But it's true that it's not, it's pretty short notice.
When and where. I think I saw Mr. Kirk next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that that certainly when the initial amendment had been read out, there wasn't a lot of clarity in terms of 1 meeting versus 2. So certainly the premise of the debate up to this point has been, and I think by the conversations we've had over the last few minutes, there certainly was a bit of confusion. Because certainly I think that if there was only to be 2 hours, an hour for each, certainly for the members of the third and fourth party, I think that we're talking about a very, very little amount of time to ask questions. So for the NDP and the Bloc, I think that would severely limit, especially them, because they're the way the questioning rounds go. So certainly, I think that a 2-hour total that cuts short. It's not long after the opening statements, and then all of a sudden, Mr. Chair, you're having to suspend and go on to the next hour. So certainly, I think that certainly I'm amenable to seeing some changes and for it to be done quickly. I think that Mr. Harris has mentioned that later in the week would be acceptable. I would agree. Certainly, I think that these are questions that Canadians have are demanding answers for, and I know Mr. Van Popta had mentioned he's getting calls into his constituency office, and I've had a number of people walk in since this meeting started, ask my staff some of those very questions. And sorry, one walk-in and one phone call. So so certainly I think that 2 hours is just far too little time. It should be certainly more than that. And I think that Mr. Motz has brought forward a compromise that I hope the committee would be amenable to.
Okay, colleagues, if you could keep your comments isolated to the procedure as opposed to the relitigating the reasons for or against doing this, that would be helpful. Otherwise, we may well go into next week. Now, let me see. In order, I think I saw Ms. Damoff, Mr. Lightbound, Mr. Harris. I think that's the order.
Thanks, Chair. I'd be prepared to say 1 3-hour meeting. And I would also like to add with these witnesses or other officials as the department deems appropriate. I have no idea from these agencies whether those are the right people that we need to hear from. So if we could just, but for 1 3-hour meeting, and just add something, maybe the clerk can get appropriate wording that just adding other officials as may be appropriate. We want to make sure that if we're going to do this, we have the right meeting. I just also want to add, I hope the Conservative Party will be just as enthusiastic for meetings on our systemic racism study, which is extremely urgent and needs to be done.
I think that was probably off the point of procedural debate. So,
point of order, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just a procedural clarification. Can the mover of an amendment, and now we're on to, I think, a second or onto a sub-amendment, can the mover of an amendment amend their own motion when it's being considered, especially with the sub?
I think the way I understood it is that was a friendly amendment, although I think Mr. Motz has moved it as either 3 hours or 2 hours and 2 hours. Where are we? Okay, Glenn, can you clarify then, please?
No, I asked whether there'd be amicability for an amendment to Ms. Damoff's original motion. She indicated that there was not. So then I moved my own motion as either a sub-amendment that it be 1 4-hour meeting or 2 2-hour meetings.
Okay, so that amendment is still alive. Okay, fair enough. Mr. Lightbound. Thank you for that.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Je pense que je commence à être un petit peu perdu à travers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm getting lost in all this amendment, but the compromise that was proposed by Ms. Damoff to have 1 meeting of 3 hours would be able to move on this subject and quickly so we can go back to our studies on systemic racism that are very significant. So I'm for 1 3-hour meeting so we can move on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair.
It's his motion first, procedurally, and then if it succeeds, then the motion would be amended, and then we would vote on the amendment as amended, and then we would vote on the overall motion. And if that's confusing, that's perfectly understandable. Madame Lambropoulos.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I think, making it, I know that Mr. Motz proposed one of 2 things, and I'd be completely against one of them in particular. I think that if we make this more than 1 meeting, then we're really taking away from the time that we could be spending on a study that we've started a long time ago, and that should get quite a bit of consideration. And I know that, I definitely think that the current motion that's on the floor is one that's really important, but we should probably finish with it this week so that we can continue onto our committee work as of next week.
Mr. Harris, dare I say the final word?
You can say that, and I hope you're right. I think we're trying to aim at some sort of consensus here. I think there seems to be an interest, at least by many members of the committee, to do this week, and it's been brought as an emergency resolution, and I accept it as that. I do think, and I just by way of suggestion, there's an awful lot of witnesses that were chosen there by their position, and I'm not sure they actually had much to do with the establishment of this particular procedure, particularly the CBSA people and the RCMP. And maybe, you know, we don't need to hear from each one of those witnesses unless they have something to say. So with a little bit of judicious a decision about who are the key witnesses, I think this can be done efficiently, and I think it can be done in 3 hours. But I would like to hear from the officials first, and that's now in the motion. And I think 3 hours, the second hour, and I hear Mr. Currig's concern about the people not getting enough say, particularly the two parties that are in the second rounds and whatnot, left with 2.5 minutes instead of the regular. But that when we do this, that we treat the third hour with the ministers as if it were a new meeting and have the regular rounds, so that we're not left with the rounds where only you have you share 5 minutes between Ms. Michaud and myself. So that would be a suggestion as to how we could proceed efficiently during the course of this week, which is, of course, a constituency week and not a parliamentary week. But given the nature of the what's before us, I believe that it's a good thing to do. So I will be supporting a 3-hour meeting to see if we can do it this week and do it as efficiently as possible. If we have an hour with the two ministers, we'll certainly be able to find out which one of them is responsible and ask the appropriate questions in fairly short order after they have their opening remarks. So that would be my my final word, if it's possible to have a final word in this meeting.
Do I wish? Mr. Motz.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to speak to the comment that was made previously about reducing the number of witnesses and or finding other witnesses. I think it's important to note that a lot of work was done to find the right people, to be the right witnesses, to answer the questions, to give us the right answers that we're looking for. And so, anyway, looking for other people around the department, would actually, be contradictory to the things that we have already done here, and the efforts that have been made to find the right people to answer the questions that we are looking for. And I guess, these officials, they don't operate at like, well, who wants to come? They come at the direction of a committee. And so let's keep that in mind, that the proper officials, if we want the right answers, let's get the right people here. If this is an important enough study, let's get the right people here, and the individuals that have been identified need to be the ones that are at this committee, because the work has been done to get them to understand who they are, what their roles are, make sure that they can answer the questions for Canadians. And then, and in order to do that, so that we can all learn, rushing through a meeting, and we're prepared to have the meeting this week. If it's 1 4-hour meeting or 2 2-hour meetings, let's get it done this week. We can move on to our other studies that are critical and critically important, on a regular schedule for next week. So let's get them done this week, and we're committed to do that. And let's get a 4-hour meeting going with the officials that have been there. And Chair, I just want to confirm that I know you have trouble keeping up with all the amendments and the sub-amendments and the sub to the sub-amendments, but if what time we vote, if the clerk would be so kind as to confirm exactly what it is that we would be voting on, that would be helpful. Thank you.
I agree with that. Mr. Harris, did you have your final word, or is this a penultimate final word? You're on mute.
I was leaving my hand up because I didn't actually take it down.
Oh, okay. Glenn, you still got your hand up? Okay. Final speaker is Madame Damoff.
Thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, I wasn't suggesting that any of these witnesses should not come. I just wanted to add that they weren't limited to being the only ones that could come. So while I appreciate that Mr. Motz feels these are the ideal people to be present, I would like to give the department the option of bringing others if so needed, so that we can actually get good information and have the right people in the room. So it wasn't to take away from any of these that are here. It was simply to add in any other officials as determined. So anyway, I think Glenn misunderstood what I was suggesting.
Okay, I don't see any others wishing to speak. Mr. Motz had a good suggestion that so that we all understand what it is as being proposed. I believe his amendment is 2 2-hour meetings or 1 4-hour meeting. In all other respects, the motion as it's presently constituted would remain the same. And, Mr. Clerk, can I confirm that?
Yes, on the amendment of Mr. sub-amendment of Mr. Motz, I should say it's 2 2-hour meetings or 1 4-hour meeting.
Okay. So do people want a recorded vote? I don't see any. Is that, we want a recorded vote or not a recorded vote? I guess it's actually easier to record the vote because otherwise I'm relying on who I see and who I don't see. So Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll on Mr. Motz's amendment?
So the question is on the sub-amendment of Mr. Motz, which is 2 2-hour meetings or 1 4-hour meeting. And I will call the roll now. Mr. Motz.
I support the motion.
Mr. Kurek.
Support.
Ms. Stubbs.
In favor.
Mr. Van Popta.
In favor.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
Mr. Harris.
Opposed.
Ms. Damoff.
Opposed?
Monsieur Iacono.
Contre.
Ms. Kara.
Against.
Ms. Lambropoulos.
Opposed.
Monsieur Lightbound.
Contre.
Mr. Chair, yeas pour 5, nays contre 6.
The proposed amendment fails. We're now on the original amendment as proposed by Madame Damoff, which, if I'm keeping track correctly, has been amended to flip the ministers and the officials.
No, I'm not going to do that anymore, Chair. So it's just 3 hours, adding Dr. Bogosh and adding to the list of witnesses and any other officials as deemed appropriate by the department.
Okay.
The order, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Harris.
I don't think that's in order to change your motion again after we've had a vote on the previous one. I mean, part of the reason for doing what I did was related to the decision that had been made to create a motion to accept a change to that motion. So I'm opposed to that, and I think it's.
What did I change, Jack? Sorry, I
The flipping.
The flipping of the ministers first versus the ministers.
No. The ministers aren't first. Officials first, ministers after. That's what we wanted.
You said exactly the opposite.
Oh, did I? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I didn't mean to.
Okay, so as I understand it, we are voting on whether, if you will, 1 3-hour meeting, officials first, ministers second, and I think those are the substantive changes that Madame Damoff is proposing on this vote. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, then if that is correct, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Just a point of clarification, was there not and other officials that the department deems appropriate as part of the amendment, just so we have that cleared up?
I mean, it's
yeah,
not.
it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but
No.
I it was something I'd
Well,
added.
If there's no hill to die on, my suggestion would be we remove the hill so that we can get as much consensus here as possible.
Okay.
Just for clarity, can you just summarize exactly what we're all voting on again?
We're voting. We're
Like
voting
read it
on
out so that we just know with total
Yeah.
clarity.
one
verbatim.
3-hour meeting. The first panel of witnesses will be officials. The second panel will be the two ministers requested.
And that has to be clear that the ministers are for 1 hour. We had a full 2 hours for the panel.
3 hours for the panel.
All right, for the officials for 2 hours and the ministers for 1.
Yeah.
It's fine. Okay, are we clear? Okay, Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll?
The vote is on the amendment of Ms. Stamoff. So, Ms. Stamoff?
In favor?
Monsieur Iacono?
Pardon, en faveur.
Ms. Kara?
In favor.
Ms. Lambropoulos?
En faveur.
Monsieur Lightbound?
Pour.
Mr. Kurek?
I'm opposed.
Mr. Motts?
I'm opposed.
Ms. Stubbs?
Against?
Mr. Van Popta?
Against.
Madame Michaud?
Contre.
Mr. Harris?
In favor.
Mr. Chair, yeas pour 6, nays contre 5, 5.
Okay, that amendment carries. With that, we're now voting on the main amendment as amended. So can we call that vote?
Just want some clarity, Chair. You said the main amendment as amended.
Sorry,
I think you meant
the main motion as amended. Yes, correct. Thank you.
So the vote is on the main motion as amended. Ms. Stubbs?
In favor?
Mr. Kurek?
In favor.
Mr. Motts?
Favor.
Mr. Van Popta?
In favor.
Madame Michaud?
En faveur.
Mr. Harris?
In favor.
Ms. Damoff?
In favor?
Monsieur Iacono?
En faveur.
Ms. Kara?
Yes.
Ms. Lambropoulos?
Pour.
Mr. Lightbound?
Pour.
Mr. Chair, yeas pour 11, 11, nays contre 0.
Okay, some begrudging harmony broke out in the last second. Now, this is a very tall order for the clerk and myself to put this together this week. I think we will make our best efforts. Is it the preference to have it this week as opposed to next week in our regular time? Well, if we had a regular time slots, we'll have to somehow or another extend our regular 2-hour meeting. So could I get a sense of whether it's preferable to have it this week versus next week? Glenn?
Thank you, Chair. As I indicated previously, I think it's important. This is a critical issue. The reason we brought it forward for an emergency debate is because it's an emergency, and it requires attention sooner than later. As well, I believe we'd be able to find time for the officials and the ministers to be here this week. Hopefully. I would hate to lose or to have some of the studies that are critical to us, and the Levesque study is important. The systemic racism study is important. We need to get at them. So my push would be for this week, and hopefully not Friday morning because I have NSECU all morning.
we all have conflicts. This, in the best of times, this is going to be a difficult thing to pull together in 4 days. It's 3 days. With that, Mr. Harris.
Yes, I'd very much prefer to do it this week so that we can continue on with our other work, because this is an emergency motion, and given the circumstances, I would prefer to have it on Thursday or Friday of this week, if that's at all possible.
Madame Stubbs.
Oh, thanks, Chair. I would note, of course, after all of this, amiably, that my original motion did allow for 2 weeks, but I would be, of course, I'm very grateful for all the colleagues' support to have this done this week because it is so urgent. But on a logistical matter, could we, can we just maybe have a general consensus here that the presentations for the officials at that meeting will be limited to a max of 15 minutes, just so that can maximize the question time for each and every one of the members on this committee, regardless of the size of their party.
Shannon, are you referring to 15 minutes total for all the officials?
Okay. Yes, I think that should be enough for officials to give opening comments, and then that will just max opportunity for we members of the committee to do our jobs.
So how many groups are there? There's public health, and there's public safety, and I don't have the motion in front of me, so I don't know how many sets of officials there are that you're inviting.
Public health, the RCMP, and Pam, public health, the RCMP, and the CBSA. And from what I understand, the health committee has just recently done this, where they limited.
So you want 15 minutes for all 3 groups.
To maximize.
Okay, so essentially 5 minutes per. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I saw Mr. Harris next.
Yeah, no, I was up. My hand was still up from the last time, sir. But I think that's fine to have. They can explain what it is they do, so that we know what their role is, and then we can ask the questions. I think that's fair enough.
Madame Dema.
Chair, I was just going to say I think that you and the clerk have direction from all of us that we'd like it as soon as possible, but I also recognize that you're constrained by things like the House administration and interpretation and availability of ministers with 2 days notice and all those kinds of things. So I think it's pretty clear everybody would like this as soon as possible, but I don't think it's realistic to require you to do it this week, because there's a lot of elements that are completely out of your control in doing that. So I think we would trust you and the clerk to do it in a timely way.
Well, I won't expose myself to a metaphorical flogging, but I'm just worried about trying to put together a pretty serious meeting, a pretty serious emergency meeting with all of these moving parts, and I have no idea whether there's both ministers are available, but we will try our best.
Chair, I have another technical question.
Yes.
In terms of the other work of the committee, would we have some time that we could discuss whether or not we can, how we can get moving on that as well?
We can discuss anything up until 5:30. Just note for members of the constituency that the clerk and I had reserved Wednesday afternoon for 2 hours. We have not published any notice on that time period, but it's possible to do, and potentially then you might be able to do, you wouldn't achieve getting it done this week, but you could put this meeting over to next week. But still, I'm taking the clear direction from the committee that this is a very high priority.
So if we have, I would like us to try and get the systemic racism study done. So I mean, if there's any way that we could find the time. I also know that witnesses were invited to come today who have been unceremoniously told not to come on the Levesque study. So, I mean, even moving them over to Wednesday afternoon, if that worked, and that would wrap up that study, and then we could return to the systemic racism report on Monday when the House returns.
Is there any appetite for that? A meeting on Wednesday. So I've got multiple hands up. Sorry, Jack.
Yes, well, I think if we're talking about, we just had a 2-hour meeting and we're hoping to have a 3-hour meeting, and it is a constituency week. It's not a break week, as some members of the public have been led to believe over the years. We started calling it a constituency week about 10 years ago, and there are a lot of people who have demands on their time as a result of that. So much as I would like to get a work of our committee going, I don't know if having a meeting on Wednesday and having to organize all of that, as well as do something on Thursday or Friday for this study. I think I think if the Minister of Health and the Minister of Public Safety are attuned to the emergency that is being presented, they should make themselves available, unless they're already major commitments that can't be changed. So I would hope that at some point we can have a closer look at our schedule, Chair, because I too think that we have to prioritize getting the report. We're talking about the report of the Systemic Racism Committee, which we've already started considering, but we haven't any other meetings scheduled to do that. And I would think that that ought to be a priority of our committee as soon as we can get to it, until we have it done, because we've put a lot of time on that. We've been at it since last July. It's a matter of extreme importance to this country. And I think we need to give that priority. But I think expecting us to have 3 meetings this week is probably not realistic.
Madame Michaud.
Juste pour être certaine, on aurait un 2 heures ce mercredi, si possible, sur la motion d'urgence, et sinon, ce serait sur un autre sujet, ou le tout serait remis à lundi? Je suis pas certaine d'avoir compris.
There was no translation of what you just said.
Est-ce que maintenant ça fonctionne quand je parle?
Does it work now? Does it work now? Yes, yes. So, Mr. Chairman, you said that you would have a meeting on Wednesday on the emergency motion. And if it's not possible, what are the options? Is it postponed until next week, or are we taking the time on Wednesday to continue the other studies? Because I agree with Jack, it is a constituency week. We have a lot of things on our calendar, but for the emergency meeting, I think we can find the time.
No, all I was saying, just for point of clarification, was that we had, because time has been so precious and so difficult to set aside, we had set aside some time on Wednesday afternoon for a potential meeting. And Jack makes a good point. 3 meetings in 1 week is a bit rich. But having said that, there is also no assurance that we can pull this emergency meeting off this week. So I'm hesitant to let go of what is precious committee time in those circumstances. And if we were not able to arrange this 3-hour emergency meeting this week, is there any appetite on the part of the committee to use the 2 hours to either do the finish off the Levesque study or something else? So I was just canvassing. There's nothing fixed or firm here. Madame Stubbs.
Thanks, Chair. Just on one point of clarification for a previous study, did you accept the concept of that 15-minute time allotment for presenters?
Yeah, that's fine. Well, okay. Did I accept it? I got no pushback or resistance, and it's not. There's going to be it's going to be hard press to get all the rounds of questions in as at the best of times.
Yeah, sure thing. I just wanted to to
No,
make sure
it's
that
fine.
part had
It's
been
fine.
wrapped up. And also, just as a general comment, I mean, I think it ought to go without saying, of course, the Conservatives certainly want to complete the study about Mary-Lynn Levesque and her murder while an offender was out on parole, certainly because it was a Conservative initiative to extend that study, to have further meetings. And I know certainly our block member of this committee is deeply concerned, as are all of us, to complete that work. And certainly, of course, it is the case that Conservatives also supported, in the very beginning of us all joining this committee together as new members, the prioritized completion of the study on the RCMP, which, as has been mentioned, has already been complete, and now we're in the revision of the report and recommendation stage. So I obviously Conservatives, because of our actions on both those issues, have demonstrated clearly our commitment to those as priority matters for our committee. And so I think the key thing is probably just to make sure that we're booking meetings when we're all available, which was part and parcel of the discussion that we were having yesterday. So I guess we can continue to have that conversation as we figure out the schedule, but certainly no opposition on that actual content or idea of completing this crucial work sooner than later. We agree. And also feel for your chair with all the time interventions and all the voting interventions and all of that have happened with our scheduled meetings.
I'm truly touched. Now, I saw Madame Cara, and I see that Mr. Harris's hand raise function is on permanent raise.
It's raised for a particular purpose.
Okay.
Chair,
this
when
one,
you're
this
ready.
is a new one. Okay. Well, I want to see Madame Cara first.
I'm okay, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the promotion. Mr. Harris?
Thank you, Chair. I did want to say that on Wednesday as well, there's a significant commitment that cannot be changed nor provided with a sub, because there's a caucus meeting between 1 and 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, so the availability would be limited.
Okay. Unless other people have other comments, the clerk and I will do our best to pull this meeting together and this week, if for no other reason other than to make sure that we can get back to regular business, if you will, next week. And we also realize that this is a bit of a high risk enterprise, because pulling together a meeting of this magnitude with this number of officials and a couple of ministers is going to require some clerk magic. And I just don't know that we'll be able to pull it off. So what I'm saying to committee members is we risk not having any other meetings this week if in fact we can't pull this one off, and having let go the Wednesday's time slot. Okay, so there we are. Oh,
John,
Pam.
can I just speak to that? We have missed so many meetings because of votes, both Mondays and Wednesdays. I think our committee is a little bit unique in this. I'm sure there's other committees that meet Monday and Wednesday afternoons, but certainly we've been hit with numerous meetings that we've had to miss. And if for some reason the clerk is unable to, and you are unable to get the ministers this week, I would be in favor of going ahead with a meeting on Wednesday afternoon, 3:30 to 5:30. I mean, to Jack's point, their caucus is over at 2:30, I think he said. Would still give an hour in between that and a 3:30 meeting. So I would be in favor of doing one if we couldn't get the ministers, and if we can get the ministers, then obviously that's a priority. Our witnesses were prepared to present today on Levesque, so they're ready to go.
Jack is still on permanently hand raised.
Of course, because of no consultation, the actual proponents of the motion, the Conservatives and our block member, were not available for that, as we discussed yesterday, Pam.
And not to comment on that, but would you be available on Wednesday?
What I've said is I think that we should have a discussion with all members to ensure that everybody's available to participate. So I can't speak on behalf of the other members right at this very moment. I think
they
Jack
look like they're all present.
Oh, sorry. I thought you meant for Wednesday. Sorry about that.
Yes, for Wednesday. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't. I don't.
So that
I think Jack literally just said he's got a conflict. So
is that then that the ministers can't come Wednesday? I'm confused. I think everybody will make themselves available for the minister. I think we should all make ourselves available for this work. We want to get down to work here. And I think we need to have a meeting this week. And if we've got time on Wednesday and the ministers can't come, then if the regular members of a committee can't make it, you get a sub. I mean, we have to do that all the time. We never consult and make sure everybody's available at a certain meeting time.
Well, I hear crickets on that. So, okay.
So, Chair, are we left in
sorry, Chair. It's probably because we actually have to all check our calendars.
That is up to the chair to call a meeting and
bear another public flogging in private.
You had a private one.
Yeah, private flogging.
It was in private, except since a couple of jabs were taken to happen here in public, I did just want to clarify the reasoning that I wouldn't have raised had happened in private.
Well,
but thanks.
Just to clarify the clarification, the call of the chair is the call of the chair, and is not dependent upon the unanimity or even the majority of the committee. But so having had such a
collaborative meeting today, Chair, I wouldn't.
Oh, I know
it if I were you.
It wound its way to collaboration at the end. It was just painful to watch. So let's get cracking on this emergency meeting, and I'll talk to the clerk and see how realistic this whole thing is. Okay.
Okay, thanks so much, Chair.
Keep watching those emails. Okay.
Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
And Mark, could you just stay on, please?